So hi and welcome back to the next video. This is video 6, NestJS with JWT middleware and NestJS debugging. So basically we will add like here NestJS middleware so that we can validate requests by JWT. We apply this middleware to all routes except our login and our register route for users. So every other route is protected, and there we can also extract like the JWT from the request. We can validate the JWT with the JWT service. And then we can also get a user from our database and look if this user is existing, because, for example, it could be that the JWT was issued yesterday, it's still valid, but the user is deleted, so he would, by the JWT, would still be authenticated, but he would not exist anymore, so that we make sure to check this. And we will also add then this user object that we get from the database, add this to the request, so that we can later use this in guards or in functions itself. We will also add like a debugger for NestJS. So for this we add like a launcher.json file for Visual Studio Code and show how debugging here works very simply and use it directly to develop our middleware. So here we come to our video structure. This is as always, first we look at the video outcome, then we read our user story for this, and then we implement the story and close it and commit everything. So let's have a quick look at what we are building in this video here. So you see it here, we started everything with Docker Compose, and now we have like our debugger attached. So this is simply with a launcher.json file that we are using here. And here we have like a breakpoint in our new Nest middleware that we apply to all routes except our login and our register route. So when we use Postman to send a route against API users, which is protected with valid JWT, if it is valid. So let's get a valid JWT and make the request. And then we can see that we are running here through all the stuff. So first we decode, we get the authorization token, then we decode the token and check it if it's valid. Then we get like the user from our user service, and then we attach it to our request. And you can also see our debugger here is working. So if we now skip it, or we call the next, then everything here is returned like before. So let's have a short look at our story for video number 6. And here we are doing NestJS stuff. So we make a middleware to verify like that every request has a valid JWT. And we also want to do some debugging with NestJS. So for that we need a launcher.json. So our story is, as a developer, I want to add a Nest middleware that checks every request except the add user and login for a valid JWT. So because for the add user where we register, so we can probably rename this for register, and the login request, we don't have a JWT because we log in and we register the user, but for every else there is something attached. And then we want to get the according user. So from the JWT we can get the ID, and then we can search in our database for the user. And then we want to attach this user to the request. So with this, we can make sure, because maybe the JWT can be valid like 2 days or something, and maybe the user gets deleted in the meantime or whatever, that when we search for this ID in our database, that the user actually exists at the moment. And then we can attach it to the request, and then we can also work with this later, so that we make sure that none of the properties change because we got them directly from the database. So that we have access to it later and can be sure that the user is not deleted or modified, we can say. Because if he is having a JWT that is from yesterday, maybe he already changed his email, that's also in a JWT, and so on. And what we also want to do, add some debugging. So we need to launch the JSON file for NestJS, and then we can have like an example how this will work. So we can do both of this in this video. So we have our acceptance criteria. We want to add launcher.json for NestJS debugging. And we want to add Nest middleware and apply it to all routes except the post API users and post API users login. So now we can start with this. So first we can start our services up. As you remember, we just need Docker Compose for this. So we can say Docker Compose up. And then everything should be here. So just wait a bit, and then we can go to Postman, and we have here our JWT. You see for the user's request, this is protected. So we can go into our API folder to our user controller, and you see getting all the users. So here, the get request, find all, has our JWT aufguard. And so if I remove this token and send it again, I'm getting like unauthorized. If I add the token and modify it, it's also unauthorized. So this works. And here I can just log in with my credentials and get like a valid token if I need it. So at the moment we are for this using like in our auth module, our basic JWT guard. And this is something that we now want to refactor. And before this, we can probably go into debugging, so that we can use the debugging for developing. So debugging is pretty easy. So first we have to open our API folder. So I already have it here, and we can just open Visual Studio Code here. We can close, we can let it run, and we are just here now in our API folder directly. Can close everything here. So this is our node modules folder, I guess. And then we can just hit our, so you see we are in our API folder. I can hit my run and debug. These are some breakpoints from one of the last times. And I can just say run and debug. And now we have to select like an environment. So I want to use NestJS, and I need a launch.json. So this will generate one for me. And you see it here in my API folder. I have now a new folder, Visual Studio Code, .vs code with a launch.json file. And we actually have to modify this a bit because we needed this to connect with our Docker. So the version is fine. We have some configurations. So our type is just node. We have the request we want to attach. Our name could be, I don't know, debug nest.js real-time chat. And now we have like a remote root because for our Docker. And here we have to specify the path from our Docker compose file, so where we are working. So as you remember in our Docker file, so you can go to here, our Docker file, we are in Thomas source app. So we have to add this here also, Thomas source app. Then we have like a local root, which is just our workspace folder. So we can just access it like this. We can define a protocol, which is inspector. We have a port. This is like the default port, and this is also the port that in our Docker compose file. Here you see it. We allow this port for debugging, and then we also have to change this command here from start dev to debugging or to debug. Then we want to restart automatically true, and we bind it to our address of 0.0.0.0 because this is also what we have defined here in our package.json. You see it here, 0000. We want to skip these node internals. Actually, I don't know what this really means. And I think this is something that we don't need. So we can now just save it. We have to stop our Docker compose. And now we want to run it in debug mode, our API. So we change this here. So here you see, to run in debug mode, we can just change the command and we can start it up again. Just wait a bit. And you see we have here like our normal port and we have our debug port available so that we can connect to it. Now we have to wait for our API. So you see we have a debugger listening. Our service is starting normally. And now we can just go to our run and debug. We have now here our debug NestJS realtime thread. We can say run. And I think we are connected. So we can have a look here. So you see we have now a debugger attached. And now we can simply set some breakpoints. For example, we go into our auth controller, user controller. And we are making at the moment the request against this here. So to find all users. And now we can just run this again. And now you see we are stopping this here, saying there's a request. And so we can now simply go here to the next to continue. We can step over, we can step into, we can step out, we can restart or we can disconnect. We could also go like, for example, into find all. We could make here another breakpoint. We could step to this and so on. We can let it run and then we get here the response. So I think like the debugger is working. So this is very, like some basic Node.js debugger. And now we want to add all our logic for our Nest middleware. So first we can have a quick look for the Nest middleware. So we can Google for NestJS middleware. And here we can say that middleware is a function which is called before the route handler. Middleware functions have access to the request and response objects and the next middleware function in the application's request response cycle. So here with our client side, we get a request, then we have first the middleware, and then we have our route handler. So here we can execute any code, we can change request and response objects, we can end the request response cycle, we can call the next middleware function in the stack, and we have to call next. Here's like a basic example. So we have like a logger middleware that implements the Nest middleware. This is just the use function, and this is just logging the request. So this is like your request, your response, and next, and then this goes on. You can also inject services and and controllers. You can do you can inject services, whatever you want, and then you can apply this middleware, for example, to a module. So you can apply it, for example, to your app module, and you can say for all routes with cats. You can apply it also to some paths and just to a simple request method. And I think you can also exclude some routes. And so if you like apply it to your app module, then this applies also for all your feature modules. For in our case, that are let me have a look. At the moment, just our auth and our user, but later we will add like a module for the messages, probably one for chat rooms and so on. And so then we can apply this just in our app module and we have it for all. So we can now just make like a new folder here. We can name it middleware. Let's go into this here. So we have here our middleware. And then we can add like a new file that we can, for example, just call authentication middleware.ts. Let's rename it auth -middleware. Or even better, auth.middleware.ts. So now we can say export class auth middleware, and now we want to implement the Nest middleware. and we make this as an injectable. Then we do have like a constructor, and it's saying here we have to implement or we have to use, because this is required. So we can say async use request from request. Here we use not importing it. Let's just have a quick look. Which request is it? Because I think it's like from Express. So we can just use this here. Yeah, we have it from me. That's fine. So we have our request, we have our response, and we have our next function that we need to call if you want to go on. So now this arrow here goes away, and then we can inject to our constructor two services. So first our authentication service, because we want to verify like the JWT, and the second one is we can get our user service, where we want to get the user to verify that he's not deleted, that everything is up to date. And so the first thing that we probably can try is we want to say we want to get like the BIRA token, so our authentication token. So we can say we have like a token array that we get. So this is a type string array, and this is our request.headers, and then we get like the authorization from it. And then we can simply split it, because in the request we can make a debug here. You see this is always BIRA, then you have a space, and then you have a token. So we just split by space. And then we have here an array with the first BIRA, and then the second is the stuff, so that we can just use it like this, and then we can access it with token array in the first. So now we have here our very basic, so we will expand this later, but now we have to apply it to our module. So for example, we can apply this now to our app.module. And we can also have a look here. So we want to implement the Nest module. You can just copy and paste a bit. So we implement Nest module. And then we have like our middleware consumer from NestJS. And here we can now apply our middleware. So we just say auth middleware and apply it, and we can apply it here for routes, or we can try what it is giving us. So we can say we exclude routes from the currently processed middleware. And this can be, for example, our for path. And then we have to specify the full path. So we have /API/users, so where we register users, and we give it a method, or we can specify the method. And this is our request method.post. Let's make it a bit more readable. So we have it here. And then we have like another one, which is our path /API/users/login. And here it's also our request method.post. And then we can apply this for all routes, so excluding these two above. And then this should be applied, for example, for our getting all our users. So for our route, and give it some time. The debugger is using some stuff. So this was restarting here. So except for this route here. So here we apply it for this and this, we exclude them. So we could now make a breakpoint here. I think we have to restart this. And give it some time. So let's try again. I think here's some error. One second, so let's close this all here. Let's run our application again. And what was it saying here? The user service is not exported, my mistake. So to use the user service there, we have to export it here, I think. So we have to say exports user service. And in our authentication module, we are already exporting our authentication service. And here we are already importing the user and the auth module, so that we should now have access to both. So now everything started here correctly. Now we can try to attach the debugger again. So this seems like running. And now we can go into our middleware and we can see we have now here our breakpoints if we can get the request. So we stopped here. And now you see here we have our request and we can have a look at it. So now we are accessing like the headers. You see here the authorization. And then you have here the bearer and the token. And so we split it. And then if we make here the breakpoint, you can see that our token array, we have the bearer and our token. So we can simply use it. And maybe we can have a quick look before again at like a bigger picture of middleware in Nest.js. So we have here our client request. Then we have like the middleware that is applied first. So we can mutate requests. We can middleware libs from Express use them. And we could handle authentication here to token validation, attaching props. What do we actually do now? Then we have like our guards, what you can access. Then we have like route handlers before. We have pipes, route handler, after route handler, exception filters, and so on. So this is like a little bit of the bigger picture. With this, you can find here in Stack Overflow if you just Google for it. Here. So now we want to actually validate this token. And of course, we also want to, just so that we don't forget it, we want to remove this guard here. So the basic auth guard, so that we make sure that everything that we do correctly here is coming from our. So we now can deattach the debugger and we can go into our authentication service and add like the validation for the JWT. We can here simply add a function that we say called verify JWT. We have like our way JWT as a string and we return a promise. And so we can just say return this when we use our JWT service. This is already, since we are in our authentication module, we have here our JWT secret, we have the expire time and so on. So we have access to everything. So we can here use the verify async and then we can give him here our JWT token. So now we can go back to our middleware and now we have our token array. So we can wrap this here and a try catch. And so if we catch something, we can say throw new HTTP exception. Let's say like before, unauthorized. And then we can add more stuff here. So now we want to verify that the JWT is valid. So we can say const decoded token is our this.authentication service.verify JWT, and then we get the token array at position 1. And we can also use this here. And then we can like debug again. And we can see this will work. So if we now make a request against our API, see we have it here. Then we have our token array at position 1 is our token. Then we go through it. Then we have like here our decoded token, which is just my, for example, my user object, my expired, my issued at time. And now we have here our ID. And with this, we want to call our user service and find our user. And if not, we want to throw an error. So if we step over this breakpoint, and we remove this. And now, for example, you see this is working. If I modify the JWT and remove just one letter from it, you see we now get an unauthorized. And you remember we have already removed our normal JWT guard. So we just have our middleware here, which is not letting us through. So now if I make it back, it's correctly. And you see here, there's no error thrown that we are not catching. So another thing that we could possibly try, so we go to JWT.io. Here, for example, we have like a valid JWT. We can copy this and try to make a request with this token. And this should also be unauthorized. And we are catching everything. So this seems good. And now we want to get our user. So we can say we have then our const user. And here we can say wait this.user service. And then we want to get a user or throw an error. So we can go into our user service and make like a new function here. So we have our find one. But if this is not finding a user, this is just returning undefined. So we can here make like a get against it or throw an error so that we can then catch it. So we can basically say get one. We need like the ID from the user so that we have in our token. And then we can return like a promise. And yeah, I know we have now mixed a bit of observable and promise, but here it's not that easy to catch these errors. Here, if we don't return like the observable later, yeah, so we have to live with this for this stuff. But maybe I can refactor it later. So we want here to user repository, find one, or we want to fail. So we want to throw then, and we want to find by ID. And this is basically all. So we want then to find, to get one, and we give him the ID. So we can say decoded token.user.id. And then if the user is like defined, we can make this for, actually we wouldn't need this if I think. We can say next and else we also throw an exception. I'm always changing my keyboard. Here. So now we have to import this, I think. Yes. So then we can call next. And we can just debug here and start the debugger. And then we can send our request. Is it starting? Let's try it again. So where are we going wrong? Actually, we're not going into it, I think. Now we are into it. So we have it here. When we can go to the next. And here, like, we throw the exception. So this is not working. So we have like here get one, we have the ID. Okay, let's debug it so we can find out what's happening. So let's send the request again. Now we have here our token. We can go, we have our decoded token. I remember this here is the token from JWT, so we need a new token. So if I'm sending a new login request against my backend, I'm getting a new valid token. And then I can use this here. And then, you see we are getting one step further. So then we have our decoded token. And we can access our user and the user ID. And then we can look if we find a user, and you see we are finding one. So then we have my user from the database, and then we can call next and everything works. And we get it in return. So now just to make sure that we catch like all the exceptions, we could like for testing purpose enter here user ID that is not in the database at the moment. And then our get one should fail. And we should also get returned unauthorized. Yeah, so this seems fine. So we can revert this here. And now what we also want to do is we want to attach the user object that we have here to our request. So we basically want to say this.request.user. So request.user is our user, but he is not knowing this. So we have to like extend the request model. So we can just say export interface. Let's say, let's name it request model, and then we extend our express request with the user, and this is from user interface. And then we can say this request here is our request model, and then this is accepted. So we can probably make here some comments. So we say make sure that the user is not deleted or that props or rights changed compared to the time when the JWT was issued. So we basically, if for example I log in yesterday with and then I get my JWT, which would be valid like 2 days or something like this, and then I make a request today and we would use directly all the stuff that is in the JWT, and I change tomorrow morning my email, then we would have like old data, or my user is deleted but the JWT is still valid. So we try to get the user from the ID, from the database, and so we can make sure that we have like the correct rights and everything. And here we can also make a little comment. So we say, or we could say, we add the user to our request object, so that we can access it later when we need it. And also, if it would be here, we would simply override it. So this should always be correct here. Yeah, so I think this should be all for this. And now we can, for example, try that we can still send requests against our login and create. So we can still send without authentication, make a login request, and we can, I hope so, also make a new user. So we have to make a new email and password. So this also works without authentication. And here, if we don't have a valid authentication, we are not getting anything. So if we have one, we can send it, and we now get all 3 users that we just created also. And if I modify the JWT, then I get also unauthorized, and we catch all the errors. So when we now stop everything here, so we can also close here the second Visual Studio Code, then we can now check that everything is working. So here, for example, if you later then want access to our request, so you could just add here the add request from as a decorator, and then you would have your request here, and then you could also access the user from the request and so on, or you could also do this in a guard and so on. So then we have all the possibilities that we need, and you can also here start the API in normal, so in dev mode or in debug mode, whatever you like. So you have here the comments for this. Yeah, so basically we can now check against our user story, and then we can close it. So now we have our add launch JSON. So this is now in the Git, and we have a new Nest middleware that is applied to all routes except our create user and our login. So that there we check for JWT and attach it also to our request. So we can now simply commit everything. So we can say git add upper A. We can commit the changes. So this is video 6, and here we just added add middleware verify JWT and attach user, also add launch.json for debugging. You can just push it, and this would be all.